class test 2. It's an open book test, so you can bring your tutorial, your lecture notes. Okay, it's in 1.5 hours, and the objective is for you to try out your ISL analysis in a time frame, so that you can see in 1.5 hours how many analysis you can do. Alright? Okay, if not, if you were to wait for prelims or even the actual exam, then it will be a little bit too late. Okay? After the class test or even during the class test, alright, you may also do consultation. In other words, after looking at the question paper, if you feel that you're not ready to do, but you have questions to ask, you can stay back to do so. But if you don't plan to come, you can download the question paper on Monday on my Google Drive. Right? And then you can try it out and submit as an assignment. Okay? Then assignment 2 is due next week. Okay? And again, if you don't plan to do, please at least read up the articles on quantitative easing. Right? So in this case, you will have a sense how we talk about US through pumping liquidity and restraining liquidity affects the LM as well as the BP as well. Okay? Right? So do take note of all this aspect. Okay, so for your class, right, I'll quickly just go through tutorial 4. As I mentioned, I won't go through every single question. Okay, this tutorial itself, if you look at the questions, some of them are very straightforward. Okay, you should have this set of guidelines, which is in the tutorial answers as well. Okay, so in topic 6 itself, right, you will expect 1 to 2 questions in the exam. Okay, there is a slight change in the exam format for macro, but the change is not drastic. In the past, you're allowed to choose 8 out of 10 questions. Now you can't choose, you have to do all the complete 8. But to me, with no choice, I think it's better. With no choice, you don't have to think, you just need to do. All you need to do is rank the question. Because all this year, giving you 8 and giving you 10, you choose 8. Most students can only finish 6 questions. So whether give you extra choice or not, I think it doesn't matter anymore. Alright, but it just forces you to really focus and understand every concept very well. Okay, so in this case, for this topic, we expect 1 to 2 questions. Questions are usually either on the curves, which is primarily affected by M1, testing by looking at slope of IS or BP. So this is quite straightforward, so I won't go through too detailed. Okay, but highlighting to you, every time when the question is on slope of IS, you cannot just substitute the values in. A reminder that you must discuss the multiplier. Alright, IS is about the goods market, when spending change, income change. But you must be reminded that although import increase by M1Y, right, injection takes place, C increase, M increase. But import is a payment overseas, it's an outflow. So you should comment that multiplier is smaller, IS is steeper. Okay, so this is a very common question that you also see in the tutorial, but you can see, okay, the focus of the discussion is not just the slope. Focus is always on multiplier. An examiner likes to test M1 because he knows students tend to think that C increase, M increase, AE increase more, which is wrong. Always remember, import is an outflow. Alright, so this is one aspect that is tested. The other aspect that is tested will be then the BOP, the balance of payment curve. But for balance of payment curve, remember, we don't do mathematical approach. The mathematical approach I gave in the lecture notes is optional. It's one way for you to see the slope and the intercept. But for the BP curve, alright, we focus on the graphical method. And in the lecture notes, I've done all types of BP with you already. Okay? Focus is discussing the correction of the BP. Alright? Then of course, discussing slope of BP affected by F or the M1. Okay? So I will not cover these 2 questions at all. They are very straightforward. Okay? But 2 other aspects that is commonly tested in the exam is current account deficit as well as the UIP. Okay, so let's look at the question on the UIP in question 1 in the tutorial. Now, UIP question is getting very popular in the exam. And a lot of times students thought it's difficult. Alright, but I will highlight actually it's not. It's a matter of exposing yourself to it. Right, and if you look at question 1, Okay, it is actually quite easy because you don't need to use the given example of countries. The question just says you just pick any pair yourself. But remember, the pair that you pick must show both countries have free capital flow. So you can only pick Singapore with US, US with Europe, or US with UK. You cannot pick Singapore and China. You cannot pick a pair that you think, alright, it is different from your friend. It's not acceptable. Okay? So the question says, uncovered interest parity suggests that interest rate must equalize between any pair of countries with free capital flow. Okay? So you're supposed to prove the statement true or false. Since the question already say UIP, right? So every time when you see the question stating the UIP, you first have to state the UIP equation, right? But remember, you don't have to derive at all. Okay? And the version that I mentioned, I prefer you to use is 1 plus I, which you will highlight. This is the returns of Singapore bonds, which is your local country. Right? Must be equals to 1 plus I star current exchange rate divided by future exchange rate. And this is the returns of the foreign, which is the USA bonds. So this is what I meant in my outline. State the equation. Okay? Don't need to derive. So you pick I as your local interest rate, I star as your foreign interest rates. Right? What does the equation say? You cannot quote this equation and say this is UIP. As given, I highlighted in my outline, you must state clearly the returns are the same in the same local currency. In other words, the returns are the same in Singapore dollars. So it's not a difficult question. Usually 1 mark is given for the function, but you cannot merely just state this equation. It's meaningless. Alright? You are supposed to translate it to the examiner. The returns are the same in the same currency. Okay? Then you answer the question. A lot of times students don't answer questions. The question gave you a cost. The cost was interest rate must equalize. Right? So if you look at this equation, if you want the two of them to be the same, it means this term here must be equals to 1. Alright? In other words, as given in your outliner, so don't need to copy. The exchange rate must be equals to 1. It means to say current exchange rate must be equals to future exchange rate. The exchange rate don't change. And this is only more likely if there is what we call a fixed exchange rate system. Alright, that government buy or sell. That's why the currency don't go up and down. Alright, but in the real world, when you want to use the UIP, you want funds to flow, you cannot use fixed exchange rate because it's very expensive. Alright, so therefore you challenge the assumption that you made. Alright, so you use the equation, but you reckon for the equation to be valid, you assume fixed exchange rate. Right, so look at my outline, that's why you use the term. However, right, countries should not be facing fixed exchange rate, they should be using flexible exchange rate. Right, so when it is now flexible exchange rate, what is the intuition? Okay, the intuition of course is this value here is not equals to 1 anymore. Alright, because your future exchange rate can go up or can go down. So if this value here is not equals to 1, I is not equals to I star. So it's not difficult, just that you might have been intimidated by the equation already and you thought it was beyond you. Actually it's not, just look at the equation. So in this case you can see, I highlight, okay, interest rate may change. And I give an example myself. So for the purpose of doing UIP in the exam, prepare your own example. You don't have a calculator, so don't go to the exam setting and then suddenly couldn't get a number at all. Alright, so this is exactly the flow diagram I use in my lecture notes. That I start with Singapore $1,000, alright, foreign interest rate is given. You cannot go and change US interest rate one. You can only change your own. So you highlight with the Sing 1000, you want to buy a US bond. This is the current exchange rate, 1:1. So with the 10%, you will get 11,000. Right? So this is what I meant by writing the entire analysis in words. Okay, so just to show you in your lecture notes, let me just toggle to show you. You don't have to turn there. In your lecture notes, you saw this flow diagram. Right? This is exactly what you write in words. Okay, which is what you see in this paragraph. Just like that. Okay? So you cannot present the flow diagram. The examiner won't understand. But you present the entire processes. So using the US 11,000, you need to convert back to Singapore dollar. So you give a scenario. The Sing dollar will appreciate by 2%. Right? Singapore dollar is stronger. The US 1100 will get lesser, which is 1080. So in the exam, when you don't have a calculator and you forget the answer, it's very clear it's lesser than 1100. Because 1100 divided by 1.02 must be lesser. Alright? So don't freak out, even if you forgot what is the answer. Alright, just say the returns of US bond will be less than Singapore 1100. And it's acceptable. Okay? And in this case, the Singapore bond, remember you stated in the equation on top, the returns are the same in Sing dollar. So now in this case, if the return of US bond is Singapore 1080, the returns, if the returns of US bond is 1080, Singapore bond must also be 1080. Therefore, the interest for Singapore bond must be 8%, which is exactly 2% lower than the US bond. And therefore, the interest rates do not equalize. So look at these two paragraphs of explanation. It was exactly this flow diagram. Alright? Okay, so use simple numerical example, use simple exchange rates. Right? As long as the focus is the returns here must be the same, and that's where you discuss what happens to your local interest rates. Okay? And you only need to discuss one scenario. So I talk about Sing dollar going up. Alright? Then of course, highlight the economic intuition. So if interest rates, the reason why interest rate in Singapore drop is because the Sing dollar is going to be stronger, funds will flow into our economy. Alright, so in other words, there's excessive funding, financial institution therefore will cut our interest rates. So this entire question you can see, you can really finish in 5 minutes. If you are well prepared, you know what is the question about. Because the question didn't give you any interest rate or any countries. Alright, you literally just apply. Okay, looking at the UIP equation. There is no diagram at all. So answers is merely just 3 to 4 paragraphs. So if you are well prepared with your numerical example, you can see. You can easily answer the question. Whereas compared to the practice question, this is tougher. If they give you a if they give you a question with 2 countries, alright, it's tougher, and in this case, you have to pick your own home country. So if you pick US, alright, so if US interest rate is 2% lower, you have to explain why is that so. It must be because US exchange rate must have gone up. That's why funds flow into US cut interest rate to be lower. So when they give you 2 countries, it gets tougher. You have to juggle who is local, who is foreign. And when you use your numerical example, it can no longer be Singapore 1000. You probably have to use US 1000 already, and you must convert it to Euro. Right? So in this case, when no countries and no interest rates are given, it's much, much easier. Okay? But the practice question answer is exactly the same. Alright? Okay? It's exactly the same. All you need to highlight is explaining why in US interest rate is lower because you expect US dollar to be stronger. So UIP says the returns on both
will be exactly the same. In this case, you might get, alright, Euro 1040, convert back to US dollar 1020. Okay, alright, so go back and try out this practice question. So you do expect UIP questions in the exam. Okay, so if it does come out, okay, you should attempt. You should not avoid it at all. So this is one typical question in the exam. Okay, the next typical question, right, I'll skip the rest of the question now. Like I mentioned, they are commonly tested. Okay, in fact, very easy. Okay, but now let's look at this question 4. The next type of question, and this is very difficult. Alright, if you look at the question, you might think question 1, the UIP question, was difficult. But this is actually a very difficult question. The question says, in an open economy, any government budget deficits, means G is more than T, must be matched by a current account deficit of the same size. Right? Okay? So this question requires you to have very strong analysis skills. Okay? You're not just playing around with the equation. You must have very strong analysis skill with a whole list of assumptions. Okay? So in this case, you start off the question with first deriving the equality first. Alright? That S is, alright, I plus NX, which is the one I showed on top. So you have to first derive the equation using Cig and X, bring the C and G to the left side. So S equals I plus NX. But remember, this is national savings. National savings is S private plus S public. Some of you keep thinking savings is private only, which is wrong. You are now doing ISLM already. It includes government. Okay? Now, here, right, you start to answer the question already. That you talk about budget deficit. So you have to make an assumption, alright, that you want to discuss G increase. The reason why you want to discuss G increase is because you want to later on bring in crowding out. I actually will not discuss T4 at all. Right? Okay? So this question itself requires you to be very, very meticulous. So look at how I actually approach the question. So I know S is I plus NX. This is S private plus S public, I plus NX. So you want these two terms to be exactly the same. Okay? So in this case, you can see, look at your S public. S public is Y minus C minus T. Okay? And you assume your transfer payment to be 0. So that's why in the S public itself, I assume G increase and not T bar. Imagine in the equation if I have T bar goes up, S public goes up, but S private goes down. So I can't. I have to plan the question ahead myself. So in this case, I will only use G bar. Okay? So I look at these two other terms. If I want this S public to be equal to NX, I need my S private to be 0. Right? So you have to think carefully. How can S private be 0? In other words, change in income must be 0. So a lot of planning is required for this question even before you do it. The answer is not just writing out an equation like that. It's not. It goes beyond that. Okay? Then secondly, you want your change in investment to be 0. Okay? And you know that your investment function is I bar plus B1Y minus B2I. So it's safe to assume that B1 is 0. Then it is also required to assume change in interest rate is 0. Right? So you can see at this juncture, I have not even answered the question at all. I merely look at the equation to know that I want my S public, which is my budget deficit, right, equals to my NX, current account deficit. I have to explore the perimeter for S private and interest rate. Okay, then I have to apply the ISLM model to think very carefully. G increase, A bar goes up, you have to shift IS to the right. Okay, but if I shift IS to the right, income will go up, but I want income to be unchanged. So I have to think carefully, how do I shift the IS back to the left? That must be due to flexible exchange rate. Right? Okay, so with the key assumptions of income and interest rates in mind, then you start planning the answer. For interest rate to be unchanged, you need to have horizontal BP. For income to go down, alright, IS to shift left, you must have flexible exchange rate. So you look at the entire question. The question doesn't sound like you need ISLM BP at all. It merely says in an open economy, S public equals to NX, that's all. But the question actually requires you to use ISLM BP, shift IS to the right one time, then shift it back because of the flexible exchange rate. So that you have zero change in income, zero change in interest rate. But answering up to now doesn't get full marks one. Answering up to now may mainly get you only 2 to 3 marks out of 5. Because a very excellent answer is to consider how would these assumptions be invalid. Alright? So the easiest way to challenge is, of course, if it is fixed exchange rate, alright, you don't shift IS to the left. Fixed exchange rate, you shift LM to the right. Then income keeps growing, and therefore change in income is not zero. So this entire question requires you to already know your Mundell-Fleming very well. You cannot attempt this question still trying to figure out the outcome. You actually knew the outcome. Alright? So with this outline in mind, right, let's go through the key answers. So I will not want to go through step by step. So this is what you did. Right? Use the ISLM BP, explain expansionary FP, discuss that the BP in this case is a surplus because interest rate went up, and your currency in this case appreciated, and IS will shift to the left because of flexible exchange rate. Okay? Then challenge the assumption. Okay? Government may use fixed exchange rate, then income will go up. So it's not critical to draw. Alright, remember, you don't need to really shift the LM to the right. You can just put a point to show that in this case, LM will shift until interest rate return to the same level. Okay? Then also highlight, okay, if income were to go up and if B1 was positive, then investment cannot be zero already. Remember, for the equation to work, S private and investment must both go to zero. So now you're highlighting, as long as income change, S private cannot go to zero. There's also a possibility investment cannot be, alright, remaining unchanged at all. Okay, so this is the first assumption. Then the second assumption is now highlighting that BP can be upward sloping. But you don't need to draw. Remember, it's only 5 mark. So you just know if it is upward sloping, interest rate need not return to the same level. Alright? So in this case, interest rate need not go back, income need not go back. So that will affect your savings as well as your investment. So this is only a 5-mark question, but look at the intensity. It looks like a section B discussion question. Alright? Where you apply the Mundell-Fleming, you actually do fixed and flexible exchange rate with upward sloping BP, just that you didn't write it down. You are just aware of the outcome. Okay? So this is a very common exam question, and you must be prepared to do it. It comes up almost every year already. Okay? So focus on the identity I plus NX. S is I plus NX. Okay? And most of the time, we analyze B1 being 0, so that investment only depends on interest rate. And we discuss horizontal BP. so that our answer will tell us interest rate don't change and types of exchange rate regime. So no matter how the question is being tweaked, alright, we always make use of these three assumptions. B1 is 0, horizontal BP, and the two types of exchange rate. So you have to be well prepared in advance. So students who are weak in Mundell-Fleming should avoid. But since the new exam format, you cannot choose question, then you should do it last. Alright, you cannot say this is difficult, I do it first. Because it's very time consuming. Alright, so if you don't answer the question, you can write 2-3 pages, you still can get 0 very easily. So highlighting to you, alright, if this is a common question, you better get yourself prepared. If you can't score 5 marks, the minimum 2 marks is to draw, shift IS or LM, discuss the exchange rate. At least you get some marks out of it. The question is not merely using this equation. It's not. It goes beyond it. So you must be aware. Okay, alright? So you can't avoid in this case, you have to attempt, but put it as your last or your last few priority. Don't put too much time and effort in it. But for some of you who can really do this question, it means you are very good at topic 6 already. You know what is the focus. Focus is always on income. Alright, and the horizontal BP is always interest rate must return to original level. Okay, so that's the key questions in tutorial 4 section A. So I leave it to you to try out other questions because the other questions were merely on IS curve, BP curve, right, and the LM curve. So they are quite straightforward except question 1 and 5 that I've gone through with you. Okay, now very quickly, now let's look at section B, the long question. Okay, now section B in the exam, the format didn't change, it's still 3 out of 6. You have 6 questions, you're supposed to do 3. Alright, but if you are a very logical person, you will not prepare 3 topics, you will prepare 4. And the first 3 topics that most students will do is actually tutorial 1 to 3. Tutorial 1 is consumption investment. Tutorial 2 is Solo's model. Tutorial 3 is closed economy. So usually students will prepare topic 6, which is tutorial 4, as a spare topic. Usually students won't do it as a main topic at all. Right? And this is why we recommend that you shouldn't do it as your top choice. Okay? Reason is, first of all, it's very hard to prepare this topic when the questions are never repeated. Not like Solo's model. You know the perimeter. Solo's model definitely will test golden rule, will always test you, about maybe TFP or adjusting to reach the steady state or do calculation. Closed economy, you know, they like to test crowding out. Whereas open economy, the span of question is very wide and you can't be repeated. But it comes out every year. So with that, take note. When I ask you to prepare as a spare topic, you must try out. Do not print out all the exam answers and start reading. You'll kill yourself, okay? So the reason why I don't encourage students to do this topic, though it comes up every year, is because it takes a lot of time. Literally every part, you need diagrams. And you know open economy diagrams are not easy, especially if you are not confident. So the maximum time you can allocate is 45 minutes, which already says you borrowed 10 minutes. It's equivalent to say if you want to do this topic, you cannot finish section A at all, because you already borrowed 10 minutes from it. So that's the danger of doing this topic. So some students, they say, oh, I want to do because it comes out every year. But not realizing it takes up a lot of time. Okay? And it is not advisable to do it as the first question because it drains your energy. Alright? You may lose confidence along the way. Okay? So diagrams are essential. Okay? They must be large and well labeled. But remember, if you couldn't finish shifting the curves, it's okay. The basic diagram draw in ink, label them. I'm very sure you can shift IS or LM first. That one is okay. Do it in ink. Subsequently, whether you need to shift BP or shift IS, LM, just don't draw. Just label the point on the diagram. And just tell the examiner point D, the LM shift to point D. Alright, so don't chase after the diagram. Because if the diagram is wrong, it will shake your confidence and you keep thinking it's a gone case. So don't do that. Okay? The key focus of 3 parts of the question, although the questions are not repeated, but the focus is quite standard. Part A is always on the basics of open economy. And I'm very worried when students see this question. For example, this is the question in most year exam paper. 6 marks, and the student thought it was very easy. Alright? Derive IS, derive LM, derive BP, 6 marks. They feel that the 6 marks is safely in the pocket. But 6 out of 20 is a failure. And the worst thing is, this question, it takes a lot of time, especially if you are not adequately prepared. Believe me, you go back and try to finish in 10 minutes, it's almost impossible. Some of you will take 30 minutes just to do part A. But it's only 6 marks. So you cannot use question A to gauge whether you can do the question or not. You can't. You must also look at part B. So part B in the exam is usually on the standard analysis. Alright? Use your ISLM BP, shift IS or LM, find the new equilibrium, discuss fixed and flexible exchange rate. So when you actually answer up to this point, usually you only earn maximum 5 marks. So part A you score 6, part B you score 5, it's only 12. And you may not believe it might be 45 minutes already. So it's not a good bet because it eats into your time. The reason why, right, you can't fully score part B is because a lot of times students find it difficult to analyze the current account and the savings level. This is always tricky. And I mentioned it's only 2 marks. But students take a long time to get the answer. So that's why time trickles away, yet they didn't know, alright, they are not managing time. So in summary, in this topic, part A and B, the guaranteed marks is very low. It's only 6 plus 5. And if you make mistake in part A, probably it's only 4 plus 5, and you get only a 9. After spending 30 minutes, which is not meaningful at all. Okay? Then part C is usually the very difficult question that you have to shift the BP. So you cannot tell me you want to do this topic because you can do A and B only. There's only 10 or 12 marks. It's too risky. So if you plan to do this topic, you definitely must do a certain section of part C. But part C is difficult because not only it asks you to shift the BP, after you shifted the BP, they want you to compare your answers to part B, which is difficult. A lot of times students cannot do it. Right? The answer is the BP shift up, full stop. They don't know what to do with it. Right? So this skill set is quite high level. So as a result, you can't score the full 7 mark. Your ability to shift the BP may only give you 2 to 3 marks. Alright, so that tells you the standard score for open economy usually only hit 15. Right? Whereas Solo's model, I told you, can hit 18, closed economy can hit 16. Alright? Therefore, the third topic, whether you want to do open economy or other topic, the choice of open economy is not very optimistic. So therefore, if you have other choices to do, you should use those topics. Should not do open economy at all. Because it's not worth spending 45 minutes, borrow 10 minutes, yet only score less than 15. It's a very poor choice of exam strategy. Okay, so hear me clearly. I didn't say you should not study. I should say try not to do it. But you should study in case maybe some of you want to do consumption question and it became difficult. Alright, then you do open economy. So you should prepare 4 topics out of the 6 questions. Alright, so your optional topic can be open economy. But don't place too high hopes on it. Alright, don't count on it to give you the excellent score. It could be the main factor why you cannot finish the exam paper. Okay, so let's look at the tutorial question. So this is how the question will look like. Okay, question in the exam will look terribly long, Once again, the question will not say Mundell-Fleming, will not say ISLM-BP. Question will merely say small open economy, which there's a BP curve. Fixed prices and wages, that's ISLM. Right? So in this case, they ask you to describe how. They didn't ask you to state, they asked you to describe how. How is a process which refers to the derivation. So you derive IS and LM. But the derivation should anchor on open economy, discussing the role of export-import. Okay, then for LM, discuss the role of fixed exchange rate. And then finally, derive the BP using graphical approach. And the question is clear. It was a horizontal BP. So you only need to discuss how interest rate returned to original level. Okay, 6 marks. If you ask me, yes, you can earn it, but you take a long time to earn it. So you must be very, very careful. Okay, then now let's look at part B, which you anticipate either shift IS or LM already. So you have a horizontal BP, IS and LM. The question says there was a reduction in consumption because savings went up. Okay, so this must be a shift of IS because they intend to save more. They like to save more. It means their income didn't change yet. So in this case, analyze in terms of your C0 drop, AE4, IS, shift left. Okay, alright, then in this case you could see, alright, we have done this in the lecture notes already, that the BP would be in the deficit. Then analyze fixed exchange rate, analyze flexible exchange rate. So this is where you can score your 4 marks, right? By looking at your final equilibrium. But the answer also requires you to discuss your NX and your savings. So we know in fixed exchange rate, everything goes back to original point. So there's no change in interest rate, no change in income. Right? So in this case, you can see that your national savings is purely based on your NX. Okay? So investment, no change. Right? And income initially, income continually dropped because IS keeps shifting to the left, then LM, then talk about NX positive. So I will skip this part, I will not run through with you, but I want to highlight, this part is the one that's always difficult to score. If you're not strong in analysis, these 2 to 3 marks usually go into a 0 unknowingly. So that's why it's not easy to score in this question at all. Alright, so every time when you were to do NX and your national savings, spend about 2-3 minutes. Try as much as you can, but don't pin your hopes on it. Okay, so that was part B. And the diagram, you can see, will look like that. Okay, you are at point A, you shift your IS to point B. Okay, then you analyze fixed exchange rate, you go to F. Flexible exchange rate, you go to A. Right, so you won't get a 0, but you must be very accurate in your answer. Okay, now look at part C. Part C is the killer question. A lot of times students read part C, they couldn't fathom what the question wanted. And the question will never say, shift the BP curve. You have to determine how the BP curve will shift. In our lecture notes, it was foreign inflation, foreign interest rate went up, we shifted BP upwards because I star went up. Here, there's no head and tail. The question says, write down the UIP, right, which we did it in the short question just now. Then the question says, repeat the analysis in part B. Alright? Okay, in the analysis in part B, alright, then we have to analyze that in this case, the interest rate will return to the original level. Okay? So the analysis in part B actually shows that, okay, with your savings actually going down, okay, the exchange rate is going to go down. So now you reverse it. Okay, right? And you talk about how the UIP will adjust your interest rate. And from your local interest rate, you shift the BP accordingly. Right? So in this case, you can see the exchange rate initially go down. Right? Okay, in part B. Okay? Then now you have to return to it. So exchange rate must go up, interest rate must go down. So in this case, you have to shift the BP down. Okay? Now, if you were to shift the BP down, you are at point B. There is a choice to shift above point B or below point B. The question is not clear. The question didn't tell you how much interest rate change. The question merely says interest rate has to change. So that's why in my suggested answer, I show you both. Okay, if it is above point B, you compare the outcome and you analyze the fixed and flexible exchange rate again. Right, and then answer must use the word bigger or smaller, which is very difficult. If your diagram is not clear, right, you actually go into the wrong direction. Okay, and of course you can also shift the BP below point B. But that was not examiner's answer at all. Alright, you will not get a 0 mark, but this is not what he wanted. He wanted the BP to continue to be a deficit. He doesn't want the BP to be a surplus. So you have to actually know in part C, answers can be very long if the instructions is not clear. All we know is the BP will shift down from point A. But exactly, is it above point B or below point B? You have to make guesses on the spot, and that takes time. So to play safe, a lot of times students do both. They shift the BP above B and below B at the same time. Alright, but it's a great waste of time. And by then, 45 minutes is up. But some students, they persevere. They say, oh, I'll take 1 hour. The moment you take 1 hour to do one long question, you fail the paper already. You cannot let time just trickle by. You cannot trick yourself and say, I need 5 more minutes. You cannot trick yourself that way. Right? So this is part C. Okay, I leave it to you to read the answer that discuss the shift of BP. But I just want to give you an overview. It's very hard to score. Okay? You can only do it as your last option if your prepared topic is difficult. So study it with the intention just to score up to 13 to 14 mark. Cannot bank hard on it. And please do not, alright? The worst thing that happens is students like to photostat past year paper and start reading. It's very, very disheartening when you bring me stacks of exam answer and I only see you highlighting, and then the part you highlight, you ask me to explain to you. I actually know you failed already. This topic you cannot read. You have to do it yourself, then compare to the examiner's answer to compare. Right? It's not purely reading. In fact, from topic 5 onwards, right, from Solo's model, closed economy, open economy, all the questions you have to do it yourself. You cannot read one. Reading is pointless. It doesn't bring you anywhere. Okay? So that is a quick overview of our tutorial 4. Okay, the reason for section B, I don't do many questions is because I've done all the analysis in the lecture notes already. So I only show you how a typical exam question may look like. Okay, regarding part B and C, we've done all those in the lecture notes. Okay, so for tomorrow's class test, you can bring in this set of materials with you. You can bring in also your lecture notes. We will actually do the Mundell Fleming together with the closed economy. Then you can see for yourself, right, with minimum referencing in a time perimeter, how much can you cover, right, in a test or an exam sitting. Now, nobody can force you to do class test 1, but let me highlight something to you. Please go for the prelims. Alright? You go for the prelims not to pass the prelims. You go to the prelims to look at the question to see how prepared you are. Then after the prelims, you will know how much you can catch up. No point you say, oh, the prelim paper is not accurate, the prelim paper is meant to be tough. But at least you have a chance to sit down to look at a new set of exam paper and see whether you can tick enough questions. And since you are there already, why not do your Solos model, your closed economy, and see how well you are graded, and see how 3 hours can slip by your hand without you knowing. Okay? So I don't force people to do class tests. You can bring home and do it as assignment, but doing assignment is not accurate. You know yourself. You may have taken 3 hours to do the assignment. Right? Nobody actually is watching you. Okay? So that's about class test tomorrow. Okay? So don't worry that you may not have finished studying tutorial 4. Okay? I find that it actually doesn't really matter because the key skills I've actually taught you in the lecture already. Okay? So with that, we'll move on and continue with our discussion in topic 7. Topic